In the dusty outskirts of a forgotten Texas town, where the sun baked the earth like an unforgiving oven, a young mare named Rosa stood trembling in the auction pen. Her coat, once a glossy chestnut, was matted with neglect, and her massive frame, towering over the other horses, made her look like a giant among dwarfs. The bidders whispered among themselves, shaking their heads. "Too big," they muttered. "She'll eat you out of house and home. Useless for the trails." And just like that, for a pittance that barely covered her feed, she was sold off to a slaughterhouse buyer who saw her only as pounds of meat. Rosa's eyes, wide and soulful, caught the glint of the setting sun as the truck pulled away, leaving behind the only home she'd ever known, a place that had rejected her for the very size that made her strong. Rosa's story began on a small ranch where she was born under a starry sky, the largest foal the old farmer had ever seen. Her mother, a gentle Appaloosa, nuzzled her proudly, but as the months passed, Rosa grew and grew. By her first year, she was already outsizing the stallions, her legs like tree trunks, her heart as vast as the prairies. The farmer's wife adored her, sneaking apples and whispering secrets into her twitching ears. "You're my big girl," she'd say, stroking Rosa's mane. Bad times were hard. Drought withered the crops, bills piled up like tumbleweeds, and the family had no choice but to sell their livestock. When the auctioneer called Rosa's lot, the crowd laughed. "Who'd want a beast like that?" one man jeered. "She'd crush a saddle." The farmer hung his head, avoiding Rosa's gaze as the gavel fell. Solve. Discarded. Too big for the world that birthed her. The journey to the slaughterhouse was a nightmare of jolting roads and the mournful cries of other doomed animals. Rosa pressed her nose against the slats of the trailer, inhaling the scent of freedom slipping away. Oars blurred into a haze of fear, her massive body swaying with every bump. But fate, that whimsical trickster, had other plans. As the truck rattled through a narrow pass in the hills, a tire blew out with a deafening pop. The vehicle swerved, skidding off the road and into a ditch. Chows erupted, doors flung open, animals scattered in panic. The driver cursed, fumbling for his phone, but in the confusion, Rosa's gate swung loose. She hesitated, her heart pounding like thunder, then bolted into the wild expanse, her hooves kicking up dust clouds that swallowed her escape. For days, Rosa wandered the arid badlands, her thirst a burning ache, her hunger gnawing at her sides. She was free, but freedom tasted like loneliness. Coyotes howled at night, and the sun beat down mercilessly by day. Hercise, once a curse, became her shield, predators kept their distance from the colossal shadow she cast. Yet, exhaustion crept in. She collapsed by a shallow creek, her breath shallow, dreaming of the farmer's wife's gentle hands. Was this the end? Too big to be wanted, too weary to go on. That's when he appeared, a lone cowboy named Jack Harlan, riding his weathered gelding across the horizon like a figure from an old western tale. Jack was no stranger to being outcast. A veteran of forgotten wars, he'd returned home with scars that ran deeper than the bullet wounds on his leg. His ranch was a modest spread, inherited from his pa, but it was empty now. His wife had left years ago, unable to bear the silence of his nightmares, and his daughter, well, that pain was a wound that never healed. She'd been taken by illness too young, leaving Jack with a heart as vast and empty as the sky. He rode these lands to escape the ghosts, his head pulled low, his eyes scanning for something, anything, to fill the void. Spotting the massive horse by the creek, Jack reined in his mount. "Well, I'll be," he murmured, dismounting with a limp. Rosa lifted her head weakly, ears flattening in distrust. She was too big, too imposing, surely he'd turn away like the others. But Jack approached slowly, his voice a low rumble like distant thunder. "Easy there, Earl. You look like you've seen better days." He knelt by the water, cupping some in his hands and offering it to her. Rosa sniffed, then drank greedily, her tongue lapping at the cool relief. Jack's eyes softened as he took in her size, the breadth of her shoulders, the strength in her frame. "They must have called you a monster, eh? But I see something, Else." He camped there that night, sharing his meager rations, a bit of bread, an apple from his saddlebag. Rosa watched him warily, but as the stars wheeled overhead, she inched closer, drawn to the warmth of his fire. Jack talked to her in the darkness, his words spilling out like a dam breaking. He spoke of battles fought in far-off lands, of holding his dying comrades, of coming home to a world that didn't understand. I was too broken for them, he confessed, staring into the flames. Too much pain to carry. But you're carrying your own load, ain't you? For the first time in years, Jack felt seen, not as a hero or a failure, but as a man adrift. The next morning, Jack fashioned a makeshift halter from his rope and led Rosa back to his ranch. It wasn't easy, her strides outpaced his horses, and she balked at unfamiliar paths. But Jack was patient, coaxing her with soft words and steady hands. Whispers spread through the town as they passed, Harlan's gone mad, tacking in that giant beast. Folks shook their heads, predicting disaster. She'll trample him flat, they said. Jack ignored them, focusing on Rosa. He built her a larger stall, fed her oats until her coat gleamed again, and in return, she began to trust him. Their bond grew quietly, like roots delving deep into soul. But life, ever unpredictable, threw its first twist. One stormy evening, as lightning cracked the sky, Jack's old war injury flared up, pinning him to his bed in agony. The ranch chores piled up, fences needed mending, cattle needed herding. Rosa paced in her stall, sensing his distress through the walls. When the pain eased enough for Jack to hobble outside, he found her waiting at the gate, her massive head lowered as if to say, "Let me help." Against all advice, he saddled her, not with a standard rig, but one he'd modified for her size. Mounting her was a feat, but once atop, Jack felt invincible. Rosa moved like a force of nature, her powerful legs covering ground effortlessly. Together, they rounded up the strays, her presence alone scattering coyotes that dared approach the herd. Word of the giant horse and the broken cowboy spread like wildfire. Ranchers came calling, curious at first, then admiring. "She's a wonder," one admitted. "Handles like a dream." Jack beamed with pride, but deep down, he knew it was more than that. Rosa had given him purpose, a reason to face each dawn. And in her eyes, he saw his own reflection, not too broken, but just right. Yet, the story wasn't without shadows. One fateful day, a slick businessman from the city arrived at Jack's door, flashing a wad of cash. "Heard about your horse," he said with a greasy smile. "She's perfect for my racing stable. I'll make her a champion, trim her down, train her hard." Jack's jaw tightened. The offer was tempting, the money could fix the ranch, pay off debts. But as he looked at Rosa grazing peacefully, her tail swishing in the breeze, he saw the truth. She wasn't built for speed or show, she was built for strength, for loyalty. "She's not for sale," Jack growled. The man laughed. "Everything has a price, old-timer." That night, doubt crept in. Jack sat on the porch, whiskey in hand, staring at the stars. "Am I holding you back, girl?" he whispered to Rosa, who had wandered over to nuzzle his shoulder. Memories flooded him, of his daughter, small and fragile, fighting a battle she couldn't win. It had been helpless then, watching her slip away. Was he being selfish now? The businessman returned the next day with a higher offer, papers in hand. Jack hesitated, pen hovering over the line. Rosa whinnied from the corral, her eyes locking onto his, pleading. In a twist that shattered the quiet, a fierce storm hit that evening, the worst in decades. Winds howled like banshees, tearing roofs from barns and flooding the valleys. Jack's ranch was spared the worst, but news came crackling over the radio. The town's bridge had collapsed, stranding families on the far side, including children from the local school. Rescue teams couldn't cross the raging river. Panic set in. Jack knew what he had to do. With Rosa by his side, he rode into the tempest, her massive frame cutting through the gale like a ship through waves. At the river's edge, the water roared, debris swirling in deadly currents. The stranded folks huddled on the opposite bank, faces pale with fear. "It's impossible," shouted the sheriff. But Jack dismounted, whispering to Rosa, "We can do this, girl. For them." He led her into the shallows, her powerful legs churning against the pull. Midway across, a log slammed into them, nearly toppling Jack. Rosa faltered, the water rising to her chest, but she pressed on, her muscles straining like cold springs. Inch by inch, they reached the other side. Jack fashioned a harness from ropes, and one by one, Rosa pulled the children across on a makeshift raft, her strength unwavering. The townsfolk watched in awe as this two-big horse became their savior. The climax came when a young girl, no older than Jack's daughter had been, clung to Rosa's neck, sobbing. "You're so strong," she whispered. Jack's eyes filled with tears, the weight of years lifting. In that moment, he realized, size wasn't a flaw, it was a gift. Rosa wasn't too big, she was exactly what the world needed. As the last person crossed, the crowd erupted in cheers, but Jack knelt by Rosa, wrapping his arms around her neck. "You're just right for my arms," he murmured, his voice breaking. "Perfect as you are."